Have you ever written a sentence before you've barely reached the full stop and immediately you've heard a voice inside your head say, "That's terrible"? Maybe it tells you the scene is boring or the idea's already been done or your characters felt flat, or anybody who reads this will realize you've got absolutely no idea what you're doing. The inner critic rarely waits until you've finished the page. It edits while you're drafting, it judges the work before the work properly exists, and because it speaks in your own voice, it can sound less like fear and more like fact. But what if that voice isn't proof that your writing's bad? What if it's a protective part of you trying, rather clumsily, to prevent rejection, embarrassment, disappointment, or failure? Today, my friends, we're looking at what your inner critic is really doing, why fighting with it can make it louder, and how to negotiate with it so that you can keep writing while it's still muttering away in the background. Because your inner critic can have an opinion, it just can't have control of the keyboard. So if you're ready to take back control, then stay with me. If you feel called to write a book, but writer's block, procrastination, and self-doubt keep pulling you from the page, you're not alone, and you're not meant to stay stuck. Hi, I'm Maddison, author and life coach, and I've created this podcast as a creative space grounded in faith and mindset transformations to help you break through your blocks, gain creative clarity, and finally finish the book you're meant to write. So grab your cup of liquid gold and let's write the darn book together. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Write the Darn Book. I'm your host, Maddison, and today we're talking about the inner critic. That voice that can turn one uncertain sentence into a full argument about whether you're talented enough, experienced enough, original enough, or somehow allowed to write this book at all. I'm going to help you understand why that voice shows up, how it might connect with your creative wiring, and a simple 3-part negotiation you can use when it starts trying to run your writing session. Now, the first thing I want to make really clear is that your inner critic and your editing ability aren't the same thing. Your editing ability is 100% useful. It helps you notice when a scene lacks tension, a chapter needs more clarity, or a sentence can be strengthened. It looks at your work and asks, how can I make this better? The inner critic, on the other hand, makes the work personal. It looks at one imperfect sentence and it says, a real writer would have written this better. It looks at a difficult chapter and says, you've lost whatever ability you once had to write. It takes a normal part of drafting, which is writing something unfinished and uncertain, and it turns it into a judgment about your identity. That's how negative self-talk quietly takes over a writing session. You begin by trying to solve a scene problem, but 10 minutes later, you're questioning your entire future as an author. And the harder you try to silence your inner critic, the more attention you can end up giving it. You can argue with it, you can gather evidence against it, and you can tell it to be quiet. It, however, responds with a longer list and several examples from years ago that you'd completely forgotten about. That happens because the inner critic often functions as a protection mechanism. It's trying to keep you away from something it believes might hurt you. For one writer, that might be criticism. For another, it's the possibility of finishing the book and having it rejected. For someone else, it's the fear of putting their heart on the page and having another person misunderstand it or criticize it. The method might be harsh, but the intention underneath it is often safety. So the goal here isn't to make the inner critic disappear before you write. You could spend years waiting for that to happen. The goal is to understand what it's trying to protect, remove its authority over the drafting process, and give it a more useful job. Now, believe me, my inner critic has had a very impressive collection of greatest hits over the years. It's told me a chapter was too slow, a chapter wasn't interesting enough, a plot's become way too complicated, and a book is never going to live up to my or my readers' expectations or to my book before it. Now, it's also used one of the most convincing lines available to a writer. You should be better at this by now. And that one can land especially hard because once you've written several books or worked with publishers or built experience in writing in any form, you can start believing uncertainty is something you should have outgrown. But experience doesn't remove vulnerability from writing. Sometimes it gives the inner critic more material to work with. It can compare your new book with the last one. It can compare your rough draft with somebody else's finished novel or today's tired writing session with the best writing day that you've had in the past. And for a long time, I mistook that voice for professionalism. I thought being hard on the work while I created it would make my writing stronger. So I let the critic inspect every sentence before I moved to the next one. The result certainly wasn't a brilliant first draft. And in fact, my writing became painfully slow because I kept interrupting the creative part of the process with questions that I wasn't yet able to answer because I was in the drafting stage. I kept asking myself, is this good enough? Will my readers understand this? Is the pacing right? Has somebody already written this better? And those questions have value. They simply belong in a different part of the writing process. What changed for me was realising I didn't have to defeat the inner critic. I had to change when it was allowed to speak and what it was allowed to do. During drafting, my job was to discover the story and put words on the page. During revision, I could evaluate that material, strengthen it, reshape it, or remove what no longer served the book. The inner critic had been trying to perform both jobs at once, and it was terrible at timing. Once I gave it a later appointment and specific boundaries around when it could appear, the pressure began to ease. The voice still appeared, but I no longer treated every comment as an instruction I had to follow immediately. Remember, a thought can be present without becoming your next action. Before we move into the 3-part negotiation, I want you to notice how your inner critic reaches you, because it might sound or feel different depending on your creative wiring. A visual writer might see the book failing or notice every flaw on the page at once. An auditory writer might hear criticism as a clear internal voice. A kinesthetic writer might experience a physical sensation like heaviness in the chest or a knot in the stomach, or perhaps an urge to move away from the desk. An auditory digital writer might receive a detailed argument in their mind explaining point by point why continuing is logically unwise. These are tendencies, though, rather than fixed boxes, and many writers experience a blend. The useful question to ask yourself is, how does the critic arrive for me? Is it as a picture, a voice, a feeling, or a persuasive argument? Now, the same's true for the bird writing personalities. A dove's critic might focus on judgment or disappointing people. An owl's might insist that there is more research or planning that has to be done. A peacock might declare that the project has lost its spark and a new idea would feel better to start writing. Whereas an eagle might use targets and high standards to say the work should be further ahead by now. Dove, owl, peacock, and eagle are tendencies, and most of us are a blend. So the point here is to understand the language your critic uses to get your attention. Now let's move into the 3-part negotiation. Part 1 is to recognize the voice and separate it from your identity. When the thought appears like, this chapter's awful, I want you to pause and say, that's my inner critic speaking. That tiny language shift matters. This chapter is awful sounds like a fact, whereas when you say, my inner critic is telling me this chapter is awful, describes an internal event. So you're creating space between you and the thought. This is also where naming your inner critic can actually help. You might call it the inspector, the committee, the perfectionist, the headmistress, or simply call it by a name like Brian. Choose something distinctive enough that when the voice arrives, you can say, no, thank you, Miss Perfectionist. You are here early. It is not your time, or something like that. The name isn't about attacking that part of you. It's about remembering and reminding yourself that it's just one voice within you rather than the whole of you. So it is not your identity. Now, part 2 is to ask what it's trying to protect you from. So try saying, I hear you. What are you afraid will happen if I keep writing? Then listen for the answer. It might say, people are going to judge this. Or it might say, you're going to waste months and the book still won't work. Or it might even be, if you finish, you're going to have to let somebody read the work. Now you're underneath the criticism and closer to what the actual fear is. And you can respond honestly. You can say, yes, sharing this book will feel vulnerable. Right now, though, I'm writing one private page after another. Or you might say, this draft does need significant revision, but revision becomes possible once the material exists. Or you could say, yeah, look, some readers might dislike this book. My task today, though, is to write the scene rather than control every future response. You're acknowledging the protective intention without handing it the steering wheel. Now, part 3 is to give the critic a new job and a clear boundary. And this is where you say, you're allowed to notice concerns, but I'm going to review them after the draft. For the next 20 minutes, my job is to write. Keep a small piece of paper beside you titled For Revision. And if the critic says the opening is slow, write down check opening pace. If it says the character's motivation is unclear, write review motivation. Then return to the page and write the next sentence. This signals to your critic that its concern has been recorded and it no longer needs to repeat the same warning every 30 seconds. Your boundary can be based either on time or pages or the scene itself. You might give yourself 15 minutes of uninterrupted drafting, or you might say, I'm going to write until I get to the end of the page, or you might say you're going to finish this conversation between two characters before you review anything. The complete negotiation sounds something like, that's my inner critic speaking. It's trying to protect me from writing something people might judge. I hear the concern, but for the next 20 minutes I'm drafting. Any useful notes can go on my revision list and I will look at them after. You're recognizing the voice, identifying the protection, and redirecting the job. This isn't about pretending that every sentence is wonderful. Some sentences will be clumsy. Some scenes will need rebuilding, and some chapters will mainly help you discover what the chapter's actually about. That's part of the first draft. Your first draft doesn't need the inner critic's approval. It needs enough room to become something that you can work with. So to do that, you have to get words onto the page. So here's what I want you to do after this episode. Give your inner critic a name and choose the name quickly. This isn't another task to perfect. Then open your manuscript and write one page without waiting for that voice to give you permission. When it speaks, recognize it. Ask it what it is protecting. Give it a later job and then get back to the sentence in front of you. At the top of the page, you might write, "The critic can observe, the writer holds the pen." One page, that's the agreement. You're allowed to hear the doubt and you are allowed to keep writing. You're allowed to feel uncertain and continue the scene, and you're allowed to create your words before you know whether they're good. Every time you do that, you're building evidence that your inner critic can be present without running your writing session. Remember, my friends, the inner critic isn't a reliable narrator of your talent. It's often a nervous, overprotective voice trying to save you from a future it can't predict. You can thank it for the intention, but decline the instruction. So give it a name, give it a revision list, give it an appointment later. Then give the writer in you one uninterrupted page. And if your critic becomes loudest after you've missed a writing goal or fallen behind on a plan, take a listen to episode 68 if you haven't checked it out already, which is called Missed Your Writing Plan, How to Reset, Rebuild Self-Trust and Keep Writing. That episode is going to help you respond to a difficult writing week without turning it into a judgment about who you are. And if this episode has resonated and you would like more support in your writing journey to finally get your book written, then head to madisonmichaels.com/call and book in for a free 15-minute clarity call with me. It's not a coaching session or a hard sell. It's simply a chat with me about whether one of my coaching pathways might fit you and your journey to get your book written. I'd love to support you further in your journey, so check it out. All right, my friends, remember, please, you are the vessel for your story. So you have to let the words flow through you and onto the page, because only you can write your book. Until the next episode, my friends, take care and let's write the darn book together. My friend, I hope today's episode gave you exactly what you needed for your writing journey. And if it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with another writer who's struggling to start or finish their book? And if you're loving the show, I'd be so grateful if you left a quick review. It means the world to me and truly makes my day to know that this podcast is helping you. And as you head back into your week, I hope you feel more supported and connected to your creativity. And remember, you're a vessel for the story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. All right, I'm off to refill my cup of liquid gold and go and do a little writing of my own. Take care, and I'll meet you back here in the next episode of Write the Darn Book.